The entire screen. There we go. All right. Good evening, guys. My name is Benjamin Hadfield. I'm a technical diving instructor and an assistant instructor trainer with SSI. And tonight we're going to be learning nitrox. Nitrox, if the simplest answer on nitrox is if you want to dive longer, safer, more energy after a dive, less surface interval, and better bottom time, nitrox is for you. My qualification to teach this, I'm an assistant instructor trainer with SSI. I'm also certified to teach nitrox as well as certified to teach extended range nitrox. So this class is going to be for 32% and 40%, but I am qualified to teach all the way up to 100%. Very exciting stuff. And I use it more often than you might believe. As we kind of go through this course, this is an interactive course, so I will be asking questions as we go along, so be prepared. Hopefully everybody's had the chance, except for Miss King, has had the chance to at least get the homework and go through that as well. If you have not had the chance to do the homework on this, please just send me a text to let me know. You can do that privately as well, just so as I get ready to put your certifications through that I don't try and put a certification through if you haven't done your homework, because it will kick it back, and then I'll have to call you anyway and say, hey, you haven't finished your homework. So anyway, as we kind of go through this process, just be aware, I want you to realize that there's a lot of different things you can do in diving. So any class that I teach, I want you guys to think about, where do you want to go with diving? What does that look like to you? Do you want to be navigation specialist? Do you want to dive craters? The picture in this is a Homestead crater. It's something, do it once. You'll only do it once. I've done it more than once, unfortunately, and I wished I had that time back. Just kidding. It's not horrible. The water's 95 degrees, so it's kind of like diving a sauna. But there's other cool things. You can learn about photo video. You can become a dive guide. Marine ecology is always fun. I love learning about sharks. Sharks are my favorite animal. I love sharks. And I love to go out and photograph sharks and be in the wild with sharks. They're like my favorite thing to see. I've actually touched sharks numerous times and had to push them off me because they just get they kind of be like that dog that always wants to sniff everything. That's how sharks can be too, if you're not careful. Just kidding. You have to bait them in a bit for that to happen. Some other courses that I definitely encourage as you guys begin your journey, Night Limited Viz, if you want to see things at night. Amazing things come out at night. Deep diving is one of my other ones. There's cool things. I was doing a lot of deep diving this weekend, teaching tech. We spent some time out at 126 feet and did some dives closing in on 2 hours. So it was just definitely a ton of fun. So let's get into it. What is nitrox? Who's got the answer for me on this? You'll have to unmute yourself, though, for me to be able to hear you.
Combination of nitrogen and oxygen higher than 21%.
That's exactly right. That's the exact one from the book as well. So good job. Let's see. You muted yourself too fast. I didn't get to see who actually said that. All right, Justin. Good job, Justin. I give you you got an extra bonus point right there for you. Bonus points are not actually transferable for cash or any rewards, but make you feel and seem cooler in my eyes. So just so you're aware. So that's exactly right. So truthfully, the interesting thing with nitrox is that it's really, by definition, any blend of nitrogen and oxygen. That's the true definition. But for today's assignment and understanding today, we're going to understand that nitrox is any blend that's over 21%. Now, what are we breathing, guys? What's the combination of air that we breathe?
It's oxygen and nitrogen, 20.9% oxygen to 7% nitrogen.
Absolutely. So for purposes, we're going to forget about that 0.1% oxygen that are of other things, of the argon and carbon dioxide and xenon and all the other weird things that we don't normally ever think about. That it's at 0.1%, so we don't really worry too much about it. So we're going to say 21%, 79%, just to make our lives easier to go through that process. Now, as we start blending and start thinking about nitrox, what we're doing is we're reducing the amount of nitrogen in the blend and increasing and replacing that with oxygen. So as we start looking at that, common blends for nitrogen that you're going to see are going to be EAN, Enriched Air Nitrox, EAN, 32 and 36. And as you guys go out to dive resorts, you're going to see that combination quite a bit as well. So that's kind of some of the things we're going to do. So one of the cool things about using nitrox is it has advantages, it has limitations. What is one of the limitations, guys? Who read in the homework a limiting factor to using nitrox?
You can't go as deep, and there's more oxygen potential for going into what's it called, where you go out, essentially.
Absolutely. So there is a chance of a toxicity. Oxygen can actually become toxic at higher partial pressures. So you can only breathe 100% oxygen for so long. Justin, you're an EMT. Have you studied or seen the effects of long-term exposure to pure oxygen of a patient?
Yeah, a little bit. When we get a person on our SATS monitor and they're up at 100%, we always reduce the oxygen to get them back down to 99 because there's some effects that can mess with them.
Absolutely. I like that. With a mess with them. Very clinical term. I enjoyed that. So as we kind of go through that, so that's one of the limiting factors is you can only be on nitrox for so long. Sorry, I keep love my Mac, but it definitely gets wacky when you start getting over there. So that's one of the big limiting factors is the amount of depth, because if you get to your partial pressure of nitrox or oxygen too high, then it certainly becomes of concern. And we're going to talk about the limitations of that as well, and what those depths and what that actually looks like. So that's the biggest thing is the other thing that we don't talk about is, does everybody realize that the air we breathe has weight? Has anybody ever thought about that? Everything has weight, right? Unfortunately, the Cheetos that I eat and enjoy so fervently, even they have weight, right? I like to think of them not having weight or causing a creation of weight, but they do. So as we breathe, the problem is which is heavier, guys? Oxygen or nitrogen or helium? I saw Jason say it.
Nitrogen?
Close. Oxygen is the heaviest gas we breathe, right? Not by a whole lot, but here's the problem: is our bodies are only designed to be able to breathe certain weight of gas, and that here's your magic term for the day. This is not in the homework, but 5.2 grams per liter of weight is all our bodies want to be able to handle, and we're going to talk about that deeper in the class a little bit as well. But so there's another limiting factor in as you increase the oxygen, you increase the weight of what you're breathing, and you reduce your body's ability to dive as deep because you're breathing too thick a mix as well. So multiple things to be aware of. Now, the advantage of nitrox, we've talked about that. The advantages of you guys getting to learn to dive nitrox is, we said this numerous times. I lovingly call it geyser gas, and I'm not the only one out there, but geyser gas, you get longer dives. We showed that to you guys in class the other day. You also get the opportunity to have less surface interval because you're uptaking less of that harmful thing called nitrogen. Nitrogen being one of the most concerning initial gases that we're going to breathe that can cause the biggest issues. And also, does oxygen have a narcotic effect? Justin, I'm going to throw this one at you. Is there a narcotic effect to oxygen?
It's still possible, right? But it's reduced from what your opportunities are if you do normal air.
It is. There's absolutely. So there's actually debate on this. In the scientific community, currently there is a large debate whether oxygen is potentially narcotic or not. And there are pulmonologists that say yes, there's pulmonologists that say no. And there's a lot of different controversy on there. My personal belief, after having dove, 4 days or big dives and had nitrox, and had those same dives where I didn't dive nitrox, I can tell you for a fact that I felt I had more energy. Now, here's my theory on that as we kind of go through this. My theory is this, is as your body does something, right? You're going through this process and you're uptaking nitrogen. The nitrogen is going into your venous system and out into your tissues as you go deeper, okay? As you start to ascend in that water column, we talked about this. This is like, pretend this is my bottle of pop, right? As I come up, those bubbles have to come out, right? Well, at some point when I pressurize this, the bubbles had to go in. So the process of the bubbles going in, the process of bubbles coming out definitely caused my body to do something. Fair enough? If my body's doing something, then it's expending energy to do that. Now, if I'm not having to expend as much energy on doing that, my theory is, and I'm in a group that believes that the reduction of use of energy creates that additional energy after the dive. Plus, I saw something cool when I was diving, so there's always that as well. But after a dive, if I don't have to process, my body doesn't have to process something, I'm not using as much energy to do that as well. So as we kind of talked about in class, let me just reshare my screen here. I actually unshared my screen completely. Let's see. There it is. There we go. As we go down to the water column, we talked about pressure coming around. And so at the surface, we're breathing 1 bar of atmospheric pressure. That's the absolute pressure. That was a test question that we all talked about on the test, as the total pressure of everything around us. As we go down to 2 bar or 2 atmospheres, in seawater, that'd be 33 feet. In freshwater, it's 34 feet. So we're going to use everything today. We're going to talk about it being at sea level and at salt water. Okay. If that's okay, we'll use a common term. So if I go down to 33 feet in the ocean, the pressure of the atmospheres causes the size of the molecules to decrease, allowing more of them to fit in the same space. So as we start talking about partial pressure and oxygen or the gas and this, I like to think of it like this. And yes, I went into my wife's sponge drawer. I pulled out a sponge and I cut it up. I was forced to go back to the store and replace the sponges that I cut up. So just in case you're wondering, I am a reasonably good husband that replaces the things I tear up. So I like this because it really kind of gives a good representation. The darker blue would be the oxygen. The lighter blue would be the nitrogen we're breathing. So this would be equal to 1 molecule of air we're breathing at the surface. As I go down and get deeper to 2 atmospheres, I'm causing twice the partial pressure. What ends up happening is each of these is being compressed in. And so now instead of having the space for 1 molecule, I now in that same moleculic space, I have the amount of 2 molecules. So as I talk about that, I have 21% oxygen at the surface in that one space. As I go down to 2 atmospheres, it compresses, and now I have 42% oxygen. I also have 158% nitrogen in that same moleculic space. As I go to 33 feet, it's the same as compressing 3 molecules into the same one space. We'll say 1 cubic square inch, right? In that same space. As I go down to 99 feet, I add another one, and I keep compressing in and keep compressing in and keep compressing in. So that partial pressure of oxygen that I'm breathing starts out at 21% at the surface, right? So at 2 atmospheres, that same partial pressure that I'm breathing is now 42%. At 3 atmospheres, it's 63%, right? And then to 94%, and so on and so on. So as you can see, the partial pressure of the air that I'm breathing increases as we get deeper. And that's extremely important as we talk about this. So as we look at this, EAN 21 has 79% nitrogen at the surface. At 2 bar, 33 feet, it's equal to 158% nitrogen, or 1.58 parts of nitrogen. Okay. Now, here's the cool thing with nitrox. If we're breathing 32% nitrox, we have a different, obviously, mathematical formula here. We're breathing 32% at the surface, only 68% at depth, or at the surface. So we've reduced the amount of nitrogen in our blend at the surface by 11%. 11% reduction. Now, the cool thing with that is that it increases as we go along. So as we get to 2 atmospheres, 33 feet, 33 feet, 2 atmospheres, we go from 158% nitrogen to only 136% nitrogen. So we have a 22% reduction in the amount of nitrogen that our body's going to uptake. And that's going to continue to increase every, that gap is going to continue to increase, but we still have an increase of the amount of nitrogen. So here's the cool thing is if we're taking, my analogy is kind of poor, but if I drink less beer the night before, I have less hangover the morning after, right? And that's the same thing with nitrogen. Is nitrogen being narcotic? If I take less nitrogen in my system, I have less problems with it as during my dive. Now, we all know that nitrogen is the biggest concern for you guys as recreational divers during diving. So if I'm taking less nitrogen in my system, am I safer, or is it more dangerous? Safer? Sorry, I can't do that.
Safer.
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 Absolutely. Safer. Absolutely. If I have a soda pop with less carbonation in it, I get less carbonation in it, right? And that's basically what we're doing. We're taking that soda pop and we're saying, okay, instead of having 79% carbonation, I'm going to do it I'm going to have 68% carbonation in it, right? And just pretend my Gatorade is a soda pop. We don't actually have soda pop in our house. So if I have 68% nitrogen, I shake the crap out of it, I open up the top, do I get as much fizz blowing everywhere? No, right? It's pretty straightforward. Less fizz, it generally means good, right? And it less problems. And that's what's happening in your body. If I was at depth and this was a pressurized bottle of soda pop, I would say that my body is at saturation. I'm at my M value. It's neither desaturating or saturating. It's saturated, right? At that point. As I come up, the increased pressure, the bubbles have to go somewhere. And so if I have less bubbles that come out of solution out of my body, then I'm safer. And that's where nitrox comes in, is it allows less nitrogen. With less nitrogen, I have less chance of bubbles, right? And it's a bit of an archaic term to talk about it that way, but it's the best analogy. So partial pressure of oxygen based upon the depth and fractional pressure. Not sure where the slide came from. I think I was trying to say something, but it is now gone. So there's two directions we can go with having oxygen in our stream. What we're breathing currently, and there's going to be a couple things I'm going to ask you guys to write down. We're breathing 21%. If we're breathing 21, that's the normal partial pressure, the level of air that we want to breathe. As we start to go in the negative direction, we start to head towards a hypoxic environment. As we start to head into a hypoxic environment, like high altitudes, like 0.16, that's the tolerance level where we start to have diminished performance, reduced mental cognitive ability, and we get tired more easily, out of breath, right? We start to hit that hypoxic environment, right? Anybody ever gone to a 12,000 foot elevation and had the bright idea to go for a run? For me, here's my experiences. I was I was an officer in Camp Pendleton, and I was running 17-minute 3 miles all day long. No big deal. I was in great shape. I wasn't fat like I am now, but no big deal. And then I had the opportunity to do a course in Denver, Colorado, Mile High City, right? And first day out there, I decided to go for my normal morning run. Decided to try and run at my 3 mile at normal pace of 17 minutes, which was good for me. And I came in at 19 minutes. I was like, oh, and I thought I was going to die, right? And that's because there was a lower partial pressure of oxygen. My body wasn't able to deal with the lowered amount of saturation. So I was dealing in a hypoxic environment, if you will. Now, if we keep along that train and we go to 0.12, this is the minimum partial pressure of oxygen required to maintain consciousness. And it's approximate. Now, remember, everybody's body is a little bit different. We talked about this in class. But at 0.12, this is the minimum amount of oxygen you need to supply to remain conscious. Now, where it keeps going on that same level of hypoxic, when you get to 0.10, I want you guys to write that down. 0.10 is the minimum partial pressure level required to sustain life. After 0.10, you're probably going to die. And that's bad. At least that's what I hear. Although nobody's personally told me that dying was bad, that has actually experienced it. So that could be not true as well. Who knows? But at 0.10, that's the minimum partial pressure required to sustain life. Fair enough? Now, as we continue the other direction, we go to hyperoxic, right? These are all fun. Hyperoxic and hypoxic, right? So hyperoxic means what, Justin?
Too much oxygen.
Too much oxygen, right? So we talked about that earlier, that when you have somebody that's got too high of oxygen in their bloodstream, you go ahead and pull that back down. So they're hyperoxic at that point, right? So at or 1.1 is a threshold where oxygen toxicity symptoms can begin to occur, right? That's easy enough to remember. 1.1 is a threshold. Now, why would that be important? Laura, why do you think it'd be important if I want to understand 1.1 being my threshold for potential toxicity? Laura, can you hear me? Oh, you're on mute. That's why. Laura, there you go.
Okay, so 1.1, just because you'll start to get the symptoms of toxicity?
Exactly. So that's our point. So it's a general safety margin. Now, what you'll find is some people will set their computer to this 1.1 that they don't want to go over a 1.1 partial pressure of oxygen because they want to stay as far away from the edge as possible. And here's how I look at it. This is, if you're LDS, you probably heard this story. If you're not, maybe you haven't. But there was one ad out there for stagecoach drivers. This is obviously a few years ago. This is when I was just a kid, right? I'm much older than probably everybody here. So then they put this ad out, and the first stagecoach driver, they tested him and they said, okay, how fast can you go by this cliff? And he got within 1 foot of the cliff at 60 miles an hour. And they're like, wow, that's impressive. The second guy, he got within 3 inches at 70 miles an hour. They're like, oh, that's even more impressive. The third guy was 10 feet away from the cliff at 30 miles an hour. They said, wait a minute, you didn't even get close. You weren't going fast. He says, you know, the safety is in staying the hell away from the cliff, right? So that's one of the kind of things that you guys, I'd like you guys to realize that divings can be dangerous. And the more you take into mind the safety considerations, the safer you'll be. So the 1.1 threshold is a common threshold that you'll see a lot of nitrox divers use as their total limit because you stay away from all the symptoms and potential problems, right? Now, there are times and reasons to go above that. None of them you guys will encounter at this level of the course. Now, there's two numbers I need you guys to write down on the hyperoxic side. 1.4. Now, this is the partial pressure level at which oxygen presents a moderate risk to divers, and it's a recommended partial pressure limit for recreational divers. 1.4. Okay, super important. So that's your working limit. Now, 1.6 partial pressure level is at the level at which oxygen presents a more substantial risk to divers. It is the absolute partial pressure limit for recreational divers, period. So 1.4 is the working limit at which it presents a moderate risk, and 1.6 is the level at which it's the absolute limit where it creates a substantial risk. Fair enough? So the benefits of using less nitrogen, we talked about this basically. It increases our bottom time because we're not uptaking as much nitrogen. But one of the downsides to, another upside, I'm sorry, let me take that back. One of the other upsides of this is we also have the ability to start pushing off nitrogen narcosis. Now there is a point, and it's at 66 feet, that nitrogen starts to create a narcotic effect. Now, we call this nitrogen narcosis or the mistress of the deep, right? Or being narked. And this is the point where with this, you start having problems with it being of a narcotic nature. Now, Ronnie, if I start to show signs and symptoms of something being narcotic in my system, what might that look like?
So one example that I was told is you start seeing mermaids and you might go start chasing off after them in the deep.
That is exactly right.
Could be a whole bunch of different symptoms, though. You can start feeling a little bit more sluggish as well. From what I've been told, I've never experienced it before, though.
Absolutely. So delusions, feeling brave, feeling concerned, loss of dexterity, a loss of mobility, loss of cognitive reasoning. One of the things that I do, because I do a lot of deep diving, well beyond what you guys are going to be certified for for a long time, is I'm doing constant checks of my cognitive ability as I go through this process. I'll get down, like this weekend, we were at 125, 128 feet, doing this bigger dive, and I was down there for quite a while. I start going through and I start 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, dexterity is still there. If I'm at 125 feet, and I've got a I've got to get to my next level. How long is it going to take? I've got to get to 60 feet from 125 feet at 30 feet per minute. How long will it take me to get there? Can I do the math? So that's really 65 feet that I'm trying to ascend. I should be able to do that in just over 2 minutes, right? But can I do that mathematically in my head? So I'm constantly checking myself with little math problems as well. Now, interestingly enough, in starting to talk about nitrogen narcosis, when I teach my deep class, I take my students out to a little over 100 feet on one of the dives, and we do math. And let's see, I don't have the slate with me. It's out in my truck, but I've got a slate with 8 math problems. Now, believe it or not, these math problems are like 2 plus 4, 3 plus 5, 6 plus 2. They're all single digit, equaling another single digit. 8 of them. At the surface, it takes the typical person, 10 seconds, I'll say, to do all of it. I've had people 15 seconds that are just like, math. Oh, that's bad, right? So they'll do these math problems, right? In 10 to 15 seconds. How long do you think the average diver takes to do those same math problems at 100 feet on air? Jason, what do you think? You saying something?
Maybe be a little bit slower.
How long do you think?
10 seconds.
How long?
About 10 seconds.
More than 10 seconds? Okay, so it took 10 seconds to do it at depth. You're saying 10 seconds, or it's at the surface, so 10 seconds at depth. James, I haven't heard from you today. In fact, I haven't actually heard from you at all. So, James, how long do you think it takes somebody to do 8 math problems that are simple at a depth of 100 feet?
It depends on if they're having narcosis.
Absolutely. There are, everybody's having, 21%, everybody's having some form of a narcosis, whether they realize it or not. I've done this, taught this class a lot. What do you think the average diver takes?
Yeah, 10 seconds, 10, 15 seconds sounds reasonable.
Okay, 10 to 15 seconds. Ronnie, what do you think? I'll ask, you'll be my last one to ask.
I'm going to guess it's probably going to be at least double what they would be on the surface.
20 seconds. Would you guys believe? It typically takes the average diver 8 math problems at 100 feet on air, around 1 minute and 10 seconds to do those same math problems. Now, anybody ever been to a bar and had a couple drinks and thought, I'm fine, and stand up and like, I'm not fine? Or my personal favorite, I had a day of where I had to sit at the desk, and when NyQuil first came out with the pills, the orange pills and the green pills, I thought the green pills were for the day, and I thought the orange pills were for night. So I started the morning at 7 o'clock to do my bookwork, popped me a couple of green NyQuils, good to go. At 11 o'clock, I popped me a couple more green NyQuils, good to go. And I'm getting my stuff done. But why am I feeling so groggy? And at 5 o'clock, I popped 2 more, and I stood up from my desk, and I fell over on my face. It was great. My friends made fun of me. It was awesome. But the thing about that is with things that are narcotic, they tend to be really sneaky. You don't realize how affected you are until you realize how affected you are, right? It's one of those things. It's a very sneaky process. And nitrogen narcosis is very much like that. It's very sneaky, and you don't realize the very soft degrees. Think about it like we always hear the analogy of the boiling pot and the frog, right? The frog doesn't realize he's being boiled until he's boiled, right? Same thing with nitrogen narcosis. And a lot of these things that you take that cause problems during diving, they can be very sneaky, and you don't realize what's going on until you get to that point. And it's one of the reasons I talk to you guys. And my safety note for the day is, as you guys go out and do dives, do them in levels. Start with little dives. Get a lot of skill in practicing little dives, and then build up to a little bit bigger dive, and then a little bit bigger dive. Please don't, after this course, come over to say, Benjamin, I'd like to take extended range, and I want to do 2 hours with 3 tanks. Because I'll say no, to be honest with you, because you're just asking for death. It's just not a good idea. So build up muscle memory, because it will definitely help you through this process. So the other thing about it is, as well, is as we kind of work with this, nitrox is going to help you with this, because you're breathing less nitrogen. If I'm drinking less beer, I get less hangover. It's pretty straightforward, simple stuff. The other thing about nitrox use, reduces decompression sickness, and we talked about that. If I have less carbonation in my body, I don't get as many bubbles. Now, there is a sacrifice of nitrox safety margin. Is richer always better? Tasha, I don't think I've heard from you yet today. Sorry, I caught you mid-drink.
No.
No, when would Richard be bad?
When would what?
When would Richard be bad?
If you were going deeper,
Yeah,
obviously.
Not too high a partial pressure as we go through this process. So we're going to get into, I'm going to mute you again. There we go. Perfect. And we're going to go back over to our slides. And here is the boring portion. We're going to go through Henry's law and Dalton's law. Dalton's law is basically the law of partial pressure. Henry's law is the law of how gas dissolves in a liquid. You guys can absolutely screenshot this. I will send it over to you and read it. But would you guys like a little bit simpler description and understanding of what Henry's and Dalton's law really are? Or do you guys want the call? I can give you either way. I can go super complicated. No? Okay. Nobody asked for the more complicated description. Can we make it harder? So Dalton's law basically is this. Dalton's law is the basic understanding for nitrox calculations. It's basically a T formula. And simple enough, Dalton's law gives us the idea of that if we're breathing a partial pressure, we can simply figure out what the new partial pressure is by multiplying it by the atmospheric pressure. Okay? That's all it really is. Dalton's law is, in practical application, is just talking about the idea of how to figure out the new partial pressure. So if we're breathing 21% oxygen and 79% nitrogen and 33 feet seawater, FSW feet seawater is 2 atmospheres. Simply enough, the air that we breathe at 2 atmospheres, 2 times 0.21 equals 42%. Easy enough. 2 atmospheres is 33 feet. 3 atmospheres, so 3 times 0.21 equals 63%. So at 30 atmospheres, that's 66 feet. Now, on the other side of that, we have nitrogen as well. So 2 atmospheres, 0.79, it equals 158. Excuse me. Wow. A little indigestion from my wife's salsa. So oxygen becomes toxic at 1.6 working load. So the working load for oxygen safety, we want to say 1.4 or below. Okay. Nitrogen becomes narcotic at about 2.37 or 66 feet. Now, nitrogen becomes completely unsafe at 3.95. Now, here's a way to think about nitrogen narcosis. And I know I use alcohol a lot, and I'm sorry. But nitrogen will be equal to about 1 martini on an empty stomach at 100 feet. It increases exponentially after that. So as we kind of go through this process, it's good to know that nitrogen creates a narcotic effect. So as we continue through this process, here's how we've simply figured out. Depth divided by 33 feet equals your atmosphere. 1.4 is the working load or the actual best mix. So if we wanted to figure out the best mix for nitrox, we're going, you guys and I are all decided to go on vacation. There we go. Sorry about that, Jason. I just saw you come in. I'm going to mute you there.
Yeah.
So if we decide to go on vacation and we say, Benjamin, I want to order the best mix of nitrox for my dive that's coming up. Here's how we do it. Now, if you guys would, who's on their phone? Hopefully not too many people. Okay, what you can do, and let's see. Get over here. I will show you if, for those of you who are, go to your My SSI app. And once you're at my SSI app, let's see, this is really fun to try and do in reverse. You go to more. Yep. More. There we go. And if you notice here at the bottom, there is tables. Now, the good news is we are looking for the best mix. There it is. This is really fun to do in reverse, by the way. Best gas mix tables. Make sure you do it in English and not in metric. And does that table look familiar at all? We just saw it on that's on your app. So tables to best mix tables, you've got it on your app. My suggestion would be, though, make a screenshot of it before you go on vacation. So let's go back over to our table here. Here's how we figure this out. I will do it by hand. My wife will tell you that I have never actually used the tables. I do the math. And here's how we do the math. If a diver wishes to make a dive to 115 feet, what is the best mixture of nitrox for this dive? Well, easy enough. We take that 115 which is our depth. We divide it by the 33 feet seawater. That gives us 3.48. Why do we add 1? Ronnie, why do you think we add 1 to this equation?
Is it for safety factor?
That's our surface atmosphere. Exactly right. So the biggest mistake in all these calculations I can tell you that everybody makes is they forget to either add 1 or subtract 1 for the surface atmosphere. So remember, if you have tattooed that on your forehead, add 1 for the surface atmosphere. That gives us an actual surface atmosphere of 4.48. That's our actual atmospheric depth. Easy enough. We're going to take that 1.4. What's a working load of partial pressure of oxygen. Now, we can substitute in 1.1 if you want to. If you want to decrease safety, you can substitute in 1.1. So 1.4 is what we're going to use. That gives us 1.4 divided by 4.48 equals 31% nitrox. And we can go over and look at that. We wanted to go to 115 feet, 31% nitrox. That is the best blend for the dive we're going to do. Make sense? Give you a thumbs up or okay. Benjamin, you're crazy. Any of those work. I'm cool with all of those. Does that make sense? That if we figure out the depth, let's see. Trying to get it to come, my screen to come back. There we go. So simple enough. Let's go through and let's do a couple of equations together. Did you ever remember the formula? So if I wanted to do a dive to 120 feet, what's step 1, guys and gals?
Divide by 33, right?
Yep. So divide by 33 feet. Who's got the math on that for me?
3.63.
3.63. I'm going to make it 6.4 because it rounds up. That's perfect. Now what do we do next? Justin, what do we got? We have to add something.
Add 1.
Plus 1 for the surface. You guys are doing great so far. Our working partial pressure is going to be 1.4. So, sorry, equals 4.64. So we just need to divide these two out. Divided by 4.64. What is our best blend of nitrox?
Do you always round up?
I do.
So 31.
31 is exactly right. So I would want to round up because I want to use the higher percentage to make sure that I'm staying within my CNS toxicity and my pulmonary action toxicity. So 31%. That's exactly right. Let's go through and let's change this out and come up with some new factors. So we've got a question mark here, and question mark here. So if I wanted to do a dive to, let's say, 100 feet, what is my best mix? Is that big enough? Do you guys need me to make it a little larger for you? I have the technology.
%.
35% is exactly right. Let's do one more just to make sure we grasp it. So if I wanted to do a dive to, I already did 115, let's see, 110 feet. What is my 110 feet? What is the best blend of nitrox? (110 feet).
33.
Is it 33 or is it 100?
Did I do that wrong?
Divided by 33 plus 1. 4.33 is what I come out with on depth. 1.4 divided by 4.33. Yep, I'll take 33. The charge actually comes up at 32, but 33 I would absolutely accept. Good job. That's all there is to it. That's how you order your best blend of nitrox. It's definitely not that complicated to do. So my wife will tell you that it's pretty rare for me to actually go back and use the chart. I generally just do the math. It's just easier. Figure out my depth. Now, as we kind of go along this process, let me give you a real world example. You guys and I, we decided that we're all of a sudden fist bump buddies. We're, bumping, we're cool. And you guys wanted to go out and check out my #1 favorite wreck that I like to just goof around on. It's called the Lady Luck. Lady Luck deck the deck is at 120 feet. Okay. The bottom layers get deeper, and it's 142 feet at the sand. So if it's 120 feet to the deck, do I want to order 30% nitrox? Or would I want to add a little safety margin in there and maybe say, I want to go ahead and figure my depth to 130 feet because I'm probably not going to the sand and use 28% instead? I see Jason mouthing the answer for me.
I would say 28% because you always want that safety margin regardless.
Yeah, absolutely. And while I'll sacrifice a little bit of my time for that, I'd rather have the ability to go down a little bit deeper. Now, the good news is you can go briefly into the 1.6. You certainly can. I don't encourage it. You certainly can, but 1.6 is your absolute positive max that you guys are going to deal with. So just be aware of that. So as you guys are starting to plan your
I have
dive.
a question.
Yes, sir.
So I know when we first started talking about it, we wanted to use 1.1. Why are we using 1.4 now?
1.4 is the max that you can go on your. Now, some divers will absolutely use 1.1 as their safety margin because that is the point where any symptoms could stop. Most divers use 1. Or a lot of divers use 1.4. That's the level that I use. But if you want to increase your safety margin and stay completely away from the CNS, 1.1 is absolutely a good number to use. So most divers set it to 1.4 though. Or I should say a lot of divers. As you guys go through this and you have to make that decision. Are you willing to go to 1.4 or do you want to just be a little safer and stay at 1.1? That's up to you. And I've shown you the math. The charts will give you for 1.4. So as you got to think about that, you can use either one, whichever you feel to be safer. So reasons to use a 1.1, dehydrated, not feeling well, a lot of dives. You're going to do a lot of diving. So you're doing 4 days for 5 days, use 1.1 as you stay away from the safety margin. If you're doing single dives, 1.4. So you have to make that decision though. You can use up to 1.4 and you're going to be probably okay, but and be fine. But 1.1 adds an additional safety level for you as well. So kind of backpedaling through that, to be honest with you. But it's a personal choice that at the end of this class, hopefully you'll be able to make a reasonable decision which one's best for you. But please don't use over 1.6. So I hope did that answer it, Ronnie, for you?
Yeah, it did. I just wanted to make sure and clarify.
Absolutely. I'd rather you ask questions. Ask all the questions you want. Now, there's a second part of this, and this is really the opposite side of the equation. As we get a nitrox tank, we need to make sure we're doing something called the maximum operating depth. Now, as we're starting to put together our tanks, we're going to analyze our tanks. Now, Laura, I got a question for you. Should James be allowed to analyze your tanks?
No,
Good answer. Why not? He's your husband. Don't you trust him?
I do, but not with my tank.
Trust you with my money and my life, but not with my tank. I love it. That's exactly the right answer we're looking for. So I can tell you, Nikki is a very my blushing bride, who I love with all my heart. is a very, very qualified diver. She's qualified every bit as tech as I am to do all these cool deep dives with me with 4 tanks and all kinds of fun stuff. We just do dumb stuff, right? But when it comes to analyzing my tanks, my wife does not analyze my tanks. Fun story for you. About a year and a half ago, my wife and I got to Florida just after a hurricane. There's only one boat going out, and it was just a recreational boat. We drove an hour and a half down to get to this boat. No big deal. We get to the boat. We'd ordered nitrox, and I'd ordered a blend for each of us. And I told the dive master, I says, as he's putting my tanks on, I says, hey, wait, I need to analyze that tank. He says, why? And I says, because that's the gas I'm breathing. He says, but I analyzed it. I says, that's great, but I need to analyze that tank. He says, but I'm a retired firefighter. And I looked at him and says, thank you for your service, but I still need to analyze my tanks. And he returned to, you don't trust me? I says, not for nothing, dude, but I met you about a minute and a half ago, and all I've heard from you is that you don't want me to analyze my tanks. I need to analyze my tanks before I get on this boat. Well, I'm a retired firefighter. Great. That is fantastic. I appreciate you. Let me analyze my tanks. Okay. So he finally let us analyze our tanks. So we analyze our own tanks. Even in that situation, sometimes you may have to be a little pushy, but always, 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 always know what you're breathing. And the only way to truly know what you're breathing is to be the one who analyzes it. It's not a complicated process to analyze your tanks. We'll go through and we'll learn that toward the end of this class. So analyze your own tanks. But as you analyze these tanks, you need to make sure that you sign off on the tank as well. So what you're going to do is as you analyze this tank, you're going to take a piece of duct tape. That's what I prefer. And you're going to write down what's in the mix. Is it 32%, 34%, 35%? Whatever it is, you're going to write that down. EAN 32%. You're going to write down the date. I analyzed it on November 12th. You're going to put down who analyzed it. Benjamin. And I usually sign it. And there's one more piece of information. What is the maximum operating depth that I can use this at? What's the depth that I don't want to go past? Now, the good news is that the formula to figure this out is just a reverse equation of what we just learned. And even better, if you go to the My SSI app, there's a table for maximum operating depth. Now, it looks like this. Simple enough. Maximum operating depth at a 1.4 maximum partial pressure for your working load, a 1.6 maximum operating partial pressure depth. So simple enough. We take our 1.4, we divide it by the partial pressure what we're breathing, gives us our atmospheric pressure of depth. We subtract 1 to give it what we need to multiply it by, so 2.5. So in this particular case, if I'm breathing 40%, hopefully you can see that. If I'm breathing 40%, that means I've got an 82.5 foot depth. Let's go over our chart and let's check it. 40%. They've moved it up to 83%. So that's how we figured it out. So without looking at the chart, if I have, let's see, I'm starting with a 1.4 partial pressure. And I just analyzed it out, and it was a 38% mix. What is the maximum operating depth I can get out of this? %38. One of these days, I need to record that. So remember, we're going to do 1.4 divided by that 0.38. It's going to equal out an atmospheric pressure. We're going to subtract.
88 feet.
Is that correct, guys? That is exactly right. Good job. Good job. So let's do another one. If I wanted to go and I showed up at the boat and they gave me a 28% blend, what is at 1.4? What is the maximum depth I can use that? 28 feet, 28% maximum operating depth at 1.4.
Can I see that equation one more time? I'm missing something.
You absolutely can. Let's see. What I'll do is I'm going to Share my screen here. Easy enough. So we take the 1.4 and we divide it by the partial pressure of the nitrox we're breathing, right? Which in this particular case is 40%. Gives us an atmospheric pressure of 3.5. 3.5 minus 1. Remember, I told you we have to either
132 feet.
Say again.
132 feet is what I got.
Exactly. It's right there on our chart too. So 3.5 divided minus the 1 for the that's the surface atmosphere. Equals 2.5. 2.5 times our depth of our feet, 33 feet, equals 82.5 feet. Do you see that, Justin? Does that make more sense? Okay. All right. So we come back over here. Let's give another one. We'll give one more just to make sure you guys got it because these are reasonably important. What if I went to 25%? I'm breathing. That's the best nitrox I can get. I got 25%. So I think in math,
152 feet is what I got.
That's exactly right. There we go. Does that make sense, guys? Do we all have a pretty good understanding of how to do the math? More importantly, do we all have a pretty good understanding where to find it on the My SSI app? Let's see. There we go. Got to just get it close enough. So there it is. It's right in your app. You have a chart. Easy enough to find. I can tell you, after years of doing this, I don't think my wife has ever seen me actually use the chart. Easy enough? All right. I'm going to skip through nitrogen narcosis a little bit. So as we kind of go through this, we started talking a little bit about, let's see, about the idea of nitrogen narcosis. All right, give me 1 second. There we go. Perfect. All right, so we started learning about nitrogen narcosis. Now, there's many predisposing factors for nitrogen narcosis that can add to the severity of the symptoms of nitrogen narcosis. Carbon dioxide buildup, a rapid descent, cold, certain drugs or medications, loss of orientation, high air consumption rate, inexperience at depths below 60 feet, over task loading, lack of sleep, exertion, psychological outlook, expecting things to be worse than they actually are, anxiety, time pressure, and fatigue. Now, before you think that I'm super smart and I actually memorized all these, I could probably get most of them. Here's what they look like. Now, Laura, I hadn't heard from you a little bit. As we start talking about some of the predisposing factors that will increase the severity of nitrogen narcosis, take a look at these. Which ones of these are purely within your control and which ones are purely outside of your control? Or more accurately, which ones are between your ears and which ones are physical? Let's put it that way. Which ones are mental? Which ones are outside your control?
So everything that is outside of my control is whatever I don't make a choice to do. So the drugs and medications are within my control.
Mm-hmm.
The lack of sleep is within my control. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. And then think about it is in terms of which ones would literally be mental issues only.
The carbon dioxide buildup, the rapid descent.
Yep, those are those aren't really between my ears. Those are more things I can control. Cold, I can't.
Oh, you're just saying a cold.
Yep. So certain drugs and medications, limited visibility and darkness. Is there a change to your physical well-being based upon you not being able to see or being in the dark? Is that a mental only issue?
No.
It's not?
No, because you can use a dive light.
You can, but if I have something that happens and I start becoming anxious, or I start increasing my ability because there's no light. Would that be a mental issue?
Oh, yes. Then it would become a mental issue.
There you go. How about loss of orientation? Is that just a mental issue?
Yes.
There you go. Let's see. Task loading, is that a mental issue?
Yes.
Absolutely. Psychological outlook? Mental issue?
Yes.
Anxiety?
Yes.
Time pressure?
No. Doesn't that depend upon how much time you have left on your tank?
So it could be either way, but either way,
Right.
it could go both ways. And I agree with you on that. So here's one of the things that happens. As you start getting those depths, there's a lot of things that go on between your ears, right? And most of it can be controlled if you realize through experience it's okay, right? Loss of orientation. Stop, breathe, think, act. Check your compass. Let's see. Task loading. This is one of the things I teach. I've got an advanced class called Independent Diving. And my whole goal is to task load my student to the point of overwhelming them. Absolutely. What I do is I get them to 60 feet. I get them to within 1 minute of the non-decompression limit. And then I tell them that their mask is broken. They have to switch their air. They've lost the line. I soot the heck out of everything as well. And I make them launch their SMB all in just a very quick succession. Right? Of those things that I just told you, which would be the most important to accomplish right now? Air? Switch to a different cylinder? Would that be the most important? Yes? Okay. So as I ask you to do 6 things, do you have to try and do them all at once? Lori, have you ever asked Jackson to do 5 things and have him just shut down?
Yes.
Absolutely. Is there a need for him to shut down, or could he just say, wait a minute, okay, I've got 5 things to do. Which is the most important? Would that be easier?
Yes, it would.
Absolutely. So as task loading is a mental issue as well. We can stop, we can say, so here's the secret. If you ever take that class with me, figure out what the most important. Well, gas, I'll switch to the other cylinder. I've got more gas in my extra cylinder. I'm good to go. Non-decompression limit is next. If I rise 10 feet in the water column, I'll get out of the dust cloud that Benjamin created to kill the visibility. I'll also add 10 minutes to my non-decompression limit. So I've got extra time and I've got gas. Okay, now I can't see, so let's go ahead and switch to a new mask. Fix the mask. No big deal. Okay, so I fixed those 3 problems. What's next? Oh, I got to launch an SMB to let somebody know where I'm at. Launch the SMB. It's the least important of the thing. But what happens is as we start over task loading, we start shutting down, and we start to stop the brain's ability for neurons to actually fire and connect. And that's what nitrogen narcosis really is a breakdown of the neuron's ability to transmit information effectively, creating a narcotic effect. So as you guys got to go through this process, realize that nitrogen narcosis is a slowing of the mental process, creating problems such as feeling of relaxation, lightheadedness, euphoria, slowed response, a feeling of well-being, increased judgmental errors or giddiness, loss of dexterity and deterioration of defined dexterity, fixation on ideas, time distortion, deterioration of multitask reasoning, numbness, tingling, sleepiness, inability to remember parts of the dive, confusion, semi-conscious, disoriented memory, decreased conceptual reasoning, and visual hallucinations. Here's a great example that I saw not long ago on somebody who had nitrogen narcosis. We were diving our favorite, the Lady Luck. And on the Lady Luck, there's a 7-foot statue of a gold seahorse. It's 7 feet tall. Beautiful. It's really cool. And there's a lot of cool life that likes to hang around that as well. My wife and I were down doing a tech dive, and there were some recreational divers, and there's this couple, a really sweet couple, and they were swimming around for probably 15, 20 minutes. They were swimming right around the 7-foot gold statue of a seahorse. It's giant. You cannot miss this thing. We got back to the boat, and the husband asked the wife, hey, what did you think of the seahorse? I kid you not, she looked at him dead in the eye, very seriously, said, what seahorse? The seahorse, by the way, is at 120 feet. So that is absolutely a huge sign of nitrogen narcosis. Cannot remember parts of the dive. So that's one of the cool things with doing nitrox is it gives you the ability to remember your dives better as well. an added benefit, right? So nitrogen narcosis is fairly common and it is temporary, but that doesn't mean it can't have lasting effects. So some divers who develop nitrogen narcosis become too disoriented to swim to shallower water. And in other cases, a diver can slip into a coma while still deep underwater. Now, trying to get yourself back to the surface can also lead to complications. If you rise too quickly, you could develop decompression sickness, often called the bends. Now, if that happens, you want to seek medical treatment if you experience the following symptoms after coming back to the water's surface after a dive. If you have fatigue, appetite loss, headache, tendon and joint pain, swelling, dizziness, pain in the chest, trouble breathing, double vision, speaking difficulties, muscle weakness, primarily on one side of your body, or flu-like symptoms. Now, how do we treat nitrogen narcosis? Anybody know? Justin, you want to take a stab at this one?
Nitrogen narcosis.
How do you treat nitrogen narcosis?
Increase. You want to breathe out to get it out. You want to oxygenate. Give them oxygen. I would think.
We're on a dive. How would you treat it? We're at 90 feet. And you're realizing you're getting narked.
I would go up. Start to go up and do my stop.
Ding, ding, ding. The main treatment for nitrogen narcosis is simply getting yourself to shallower water or to the surface. If your symptoms are mild, you can stay in shallower water with your dive partner and dive team while you wait for them to clear. Now, once your symptoms have cleared, you can resume diving at shallower depths. Just make sure you don't return to the depth where you started to notice the symptoms. If your symptoms don't resolve once you reach shallower water, you'll need to end your dive and head to the surface.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Yes, absolutely.
Are certain people more susceptible to it, where they're more likely to get it than others, or is it?
Yes.
Is it more conditional on how your body's feeling that day?
Yes. So nitrogen narcosis, there are some people. I was reading about Sheck Exley, and that's an interesting one to read about. He was a famous cave diver who died in a cave of HPNS, high pressure nervous system disorder, right? As they were studying Sheck, they determined that Sheck was highly nitrogen resistant, or highly nitrogen narcosis resistant. He was able to do incredibly deep air dives in ranges where the normal human would get nitrogen narcosis. And he seemed to show no symptoms or symptomatic problems of nitrogen narcosis at all. He seemed to keep it together. I can tell you from personal experience, there are absolutely times where I've done deep dives and I've had zero issue. And I have done some deep dives where I've definitely felt anything and knew things weren't right. For me, I tend to get the overwhelming feeling of issue or concern that something bad's going to happen, or that there's that I've not done what I should have done. I get a feeling of dread or doom. That's my sign and symptom. I've actually felt it, not very often. And it's only been on my deepest dives and my biggest, scariest dives, but I have absolutely felt it. And when you feel that, you're like, okay, time to go ahead and thumb this dive and head ourselves to shallower, right? So for me, I've done deeper dives with no symptoms, and I've done shallower dives with light symptoms. So it depends on the person. It depends on the time of day. It depends on how much rest you have. If you have any fatigue, how well prepared you are, how hard you work to get there, how heavy you're breathing, how cold the water is absolutely a dynamic of this as well. So being aware of those symptoms, they can absolutely increase the signs and symptoms of that. So again, some of the things that will increase nitrogen narcosis, a rapid descent. I got to get down to the bottom quickly, right? It's a disorientation. Cold. I'm feeling cold. I had a diver this weekend that decided to come out and do some deco class with me, and he was in a wetsuit, 48-degree water. I only let him do one dive. I'm like, after we got done with dive one, he came out shivering. I'm like, you're done. That's it. I'm not taking you in for dive two. That's not happening. If you decide to do dive two, you got to go somewhere else where I can't see you, because you're not diving with me. You're a risk, right? And not only is he a risk for hypothermia, but he's a high risk for nitrogen narcosis, right? Loss of visibility. We're in Ryrie. There's places in Ryrie where we dive through where we have 5 feet of viz. It's very easy to get disoriented. And as we're starting to build up that depth experience, it still work for him. A lot of exertion to get down there. All those things absolutely lend themselves to nitrogen narcosis. So be aware. Those are things to be aware of. Make sense? So let's kind of move on from nitrogen narcosis. Oxygen toxicity, the signs and symptoms. Now, interestingly enough, anybody know when the first studies about oxygen toxicity happened? It's kind of interesting.
When the people
Justin,
were going down on the dive well.
Yeah, the first real studies on this were in the late 1800s. Paul Burton and Dr. Lorraine Smith, Dr. J. Lorraine Smith, actually a French guy, first started studying the toxic effects of oxygen in the lungs in 1899. And they noted that the severity of the effects increased with the partial pressure of oxygen, and the effects were largely reversible. Now, the toxic effects of oxygen at partial pressures between 0.45 and 1.6 are primarily in the lungs. That's pulmonary oxygen toxicity. And the toxic effects of partial pressure over 1.6 are primarily in the brain, central nervous system toxicity. Now, interestingly enough, as we kind of go through this, the oxygen signs and symptoms, the earliest signs of pulmonary oxygen toxicity is a mild irritation in the throat, and it's made worse by deep breathing. This progresses on to mild cough, followed by more severe irritation until breathing becomes very painful. The cough becomes uncontrollable. Now, if exposure to oxygen is continued, the person's going to notice a tightness in the chest, difficulty breathing, and shortness of breath. And if that exposure continues too long, the person can die because they're not actually able to process the oxygen. The hemoglobin barrier shuts down and they cannot breathe anymore. Now, the progressive damage to the lungs eventually makes it impossible for the person to breathe at that point. Now, here's the good news. That's the scary part. The good news is this: for pulmonary oxygen toxicity, most individuals can tolerate 12 to 16 hours of oxygen at 1.0 partial pressure of oxygen, 8 to 14 hours of 1.5, and 3 to 6 hours of 2.0 before developing symptoms. Now, there's several ways to track the symptoms, but the most accurate way is to track pulmonary oxygen toxicity, but the most accurate way and most sensitive is the development of symptoms. So if you start feeling that cough, that tightness in the chest, anything like that, it's time to stop, right? Now, the great thing about this is as well, these mild effects are completely reversible and no permanent lung damage will occur. However, it could take 2 to 4 weeks to fix, for you to be past that and be cured, if you will. Now, CNS toxicity is a little bit different. CNS toxicity affects the central nervous system, and we remember this. Justin, do you know the acronym for CNS toxicity? Just curious if they teach that in EMT. No worries. It's convented. So con for convulsions, V for vision, tunnel vision or other changes in your visual, ringing in the ears, nausea, twitching, usually in the facial muscles, irritability, and dizziness. Now, James, I'm going to give you a warning that if you've done something dumb in the morning and you come up after a dive and Laura is irritable with you, that's probably not CNS. I'm just going to put that out there for you. So that's my thing. But here's the thing. As I want you guys to really realize, diving is the most self-aware sport you will ever be a part of. Period. End of statement. I've played a lot of sports. I'm big into my sports. But diving is really about being aware of yourself and your buddy. I want you guys to think about this. We talk a lot about buddy diving. You really need to think about team diving, okay? This is a team sport, not same ocean, same dive, but as we dive with a buddy in a team environment, which this is what it means. So, for example, James and Laura, as you guys come up on the boat, you start noticing, how does my partner acting? Now, if I stepped on her foot getting back on the boat, then yes, she's going to be irritable, but is she nauseous? Is she stumbling around other than because I stepped on her foot, right? Or dropped the tank on her, right? Start noticing these things as a dive buddy, and you dive with your partner long enough. Jason, I would guess that you know when your wife's about to get ticked off at you. You've got a pretty good understanding. Tasha, I think you probably feel those points where you're about ready to slap him across the head, right? And we all know that point where when our wife's getting ready to get the frying pan, we're like, I'm sorry. I'll buy you something. You want a new purse? Yes. Whatever it is, right? I jest, of course, but we notice these things. And so as we get on the dive boat, I know we've just got up and we got done seeing cool eels and pretty fish and all kinds of manner of amazing things that we've only seen on Jacques Cousteau. But be aware of your buddy. Take account of that. Take account of yourself. How do I feel? Do I have joint pain? Am I dizzy? Am I feeling nauseous? Now, nausea certainly could be that I had the brilliant idea to have Los Albertos just before going out on a dive boat. That's certainly, a personal experience that I like to share often. But it certainly be aware, why am I nauseous? Is it Los Albertos? Is it that I didn't take any Dramamine? Or is there something else to it? So start evaluating all those pieces and check yourself out. How do I feel? Am I narrow to vision? I'm a retired Marine, or former Marine. So with that, I always have tinnitus. So I go into the water with tinnitus. I come out of the water tinnitus. No big deal. Now I'm waiting for that day that I go into the water with tinnitus and I come out without tinnitus. I may not talk to the doctor, but that would be a wonderful thing. But it hasn't happened yet. So as we kind of go through this, take that self account. What's going on with me? What's going on with my dive buddy? Am I being a good dive buddy? So think about that as you got to go through that process. Now, as you dive deeper, here's a question on the test. Who's got the answer for me? As you dive deeper, the narcotic effect of nitrogen gets
greater.
Greater, absolutely. Let's see. Which of the following is not a sign and symptom of decompression sickness? Not a sign.
I'm going to go with D on that one.
We have a D. I see Laura give me the C. I see Jason give me the C, which I'm sure that meant Tasha gave him the answer, so perfect. James, what do you think?
C.
C? All right. I got it overwhelming for C, and C is exactly right. So as we go through this, cyanosis, bluing, comes from two different things, either hypothermia or lack of oxygen, right, Justin? So absolute weakness, extreme fatigue, tingling of the extremities. Even if a diver suffers decompression sickness in a remote location and is symptomatic, you should never, we talked about this in open water, Ronnie, what do you think?
Recompress the diver underwater.
Absolutely. James, how fun is it to try and put an AED on that 400-pound person that fell over in their powder room?
You can't. You got to slide them out first.
Exactly. So all you're doing is putting them underwater as you're creating an environment in which you cannot provide adequate treatment. All right. This is just a fun one to say. Hypoxic hypoxia is by far the most common form of hypoxia. Whew. This condition is where Laura, what do you think?
Arterial blood is too low.
Yep. That's exactly right. Good job. All right. I asked you guys to write some numbers down. Hopefully you did. When oxygen pressure in the body drops below a partial pressure of 0.17 atmospheres, mild symptom hypoxia occur. Blackout and death may occur if the partial pressure drops to
0.1.
D.
D. That's exactly right. 0.10. It's a bad place to be. All right. A possible source of contaminated air in a scuba cylinder is
A.
A is exactly right. I heard Laura say that, I think. All answers correct. Improperly located intake on the air compressor. Now, what you're going to find when you go to some of these third world countries, their air compressors are diesel generated because they don't have the power grid. So they'll put the intake and the exhaust too close together. Improperly maintained air compressor, that means they don't have a good filter on that. And it's not filtering the way it should. It puts particles in your tank, and oil vapors in the air compressor. They have put oil in their filter or don't have a filter in it at all. So just be aware that does happen. Always smell your gas for fun.
How would you prevent that?
The simple way is to start with, always smell your gas. Crack the tank a little bit and smell your gas. If it smells like anything, it's bad, period. That's the most simple. The second way you can to help with that as well is always make sure your first stage that if you have your own, is well maintained. One of the interesting things in a first stage, there is a small metal filter in there to help filter out anything that will be coming from the tank into your body. It has to be pretty small to make it through that little sieve filter. So probably maintain gear and making sure I always smell my gas first. Easy enough? All right. So let's kind of move down. So interestingly enough, we've been talking a lot about decompression theory. And I've been kind of sneaking it in on you guys. So the first person that kind of talked about decompression theory was Haldane. J.S. Haldane was massive genius. He worked on this along with Paul Burt back in the early 1800s and early 1900s, or late 1800s, early 1900s. And he came up with the basic idea and said, there's a problem here. People are getting the bends. We've got to figure this out. And so he started searching. He was working for the British Admiralty at the time. And he said, I think what it is when people get to a depth where they're breathing a 2-to-1 ratio of gas, when the gas is twice as dense, which is 33 feet seawater, that there becomes a problem. And we have to deal with that. Because after that point, we've created bubbles in the blood, into the tissue compartments that have to come out. Well, he was on the right track. And he was doing really well. And so later on in the 60s, Dr. Robert Workman, who was a captain in the Coast Guard, oddly enough, said, you're close. You're almost there. What it really is, it's Workman's critical difference. And that's when the partial pressure of nitrogen hits a 2-to-1 ratio. So when we literally double the partial pressure of nitrogen, that's when we have a problem. So that's why we're able to work it to a different ratio when we do nitrogen, because at nitrogen, we're able to go deeper before we get to that full doubling of pressure of it. So he was very sharp. Now, as we kind of fast forward a little bit, Shell Oil funded a guy named Albert Bullman. And Albert Bullman is kind of our Mac Daddy of all algorithms. And he came up with Bullman's model. And he said, wait, y'all are kind of on the right track, but not quite there. What he decided is that there's multiple tissue compartments, and each one of these tissue compartments absorbs and releases gases at different times. And so he created an algorithm that said, here's how this basically works, right? At this tissue, a fat tissue releases gas slower than a fast tissue, which would be like our brainstem or our brain, right? So he kind of came up with that basic idea. So at the same, as he kind of going through this process, he figured this out. And so Henry steps in, and we get the idea. This is how partial pressure gases dissolve in a liquid, and they dissolve. The amount of gas which dissolves in a liquid is proportional to the partial pressure of that gas based upon the agitation and temperature. Now, what's the liquid we're talking about here? Justin, what's the liquid?
The liquid we're talking about, oxygen?
Yeah.
Is that what you're talking about?
So a gas is dissolving in a liquid. What liquid are we talking about in our body that this gas is dissolving in?
Water.
Yeah.
The blood. We breathe this in. So as we breathe the gas in, air, nitrox, whatever we're breathing, it goes down the trachea, into the lungs, through the alveolar, and into the bloodstream, right? Basically. Is that what's happening into the veins? And it goes into the arterial network and out to the tissues. So it's dissolving at a rate that's proportionate to the partial pressure. So as we go deeper, it's a higher partial pressure. We get to that 42% oxygen or 63% oxygen. It's going in, but it's also dissolving at a rate based upon the amount of agitation. So Justin, if we're talking about blood, what creates the agitation in the blood?
Yeah, your heart, the beating of your heart, the speed
right?
of it.
Absolutely. So as I'm getting into this partial pressure, it's dissolving in the system. So as I breathe harder, it dissolves faster. Okay. Now there's a third part of this to be aware of as well. And we in Idaho and understanding cold weather, understand that cold hurts, right? So as a gas gets colder, it dissolves faster as well. Now, this is important if you're diving in Idaho, because if you're diving colder water, you're absorbing more gas more quickly. So if I'm absorbing because of the cold water, James, for you, how would this affect my safety stops and my ascent rates?
You'd want to go. You'd want to go ascend. You'd want to ascend slower. No,
Yes.
You'd want to ascend faster, and
Slower.
then you'd want to have more safety stops.
Correct. Slower ascents, longer safety stops.
Slower.
So just
Okay,
be aware.
yeah.
We want to give the gas more time to come out because we've absorbed more gas more quickly. So just be aware. Henry's basically talks about that. That's what we're talking about with Henry's. So as it's coming out, how does this gas come out of our system in the form of bubbles? Well, it's coming out through our arterial system. It comes out and it eventually goes to the heart, goes to the lungs, and we expel these bubbles and this gas out of our lungs, right? Does that make sense? So we're breathing in, it goes in, out to the tissues, comes out of the tissues, back into the bloodstream, transports back to the lungs, to the alveolar, and we expel it as gas, right? So that's basically what we're looking at. That's saturation and desaturation. So as we look at this, let's see. We actually went over that in class. I'm going to skip that because we went over that class already. The nice thing is we have the ability nowadays. We all have computers. And interesting enough, my little iPhone here is got 4 times the amount of power it took, or computing power that it took to launch the first NASA trip to the moon. Well, all of us now have access. We can all have dive computers. Now, the big thing with dive computers is that they are now tracking through this algorithm from Bowman the gas saturation into our bodies, and it's able to give us a no decompression time, how long we're dived. They can also monitor how much gas is in our tank, what our current depth is, as well as our ascent rates. So this is one of the great things with this. Now, the most dive computers, 90% of them out there, also have a nitrox mode for you. So you're able to program in what blend of nitrox you're currently running. You can also change your partial pressure and say, I want my nitrox blend partial pressure max to be 1.4, 1.1. You get to choose your safety margin. What some people will do is they'll actually dive nitrox on an air table. And what that'll do is it increases their safety margin dramatically. Other cool things about your computer that I really like is it'll have a set meter as well. So it's monitoring how fast the gas is coming out of your system and telling you, wait a minute, too much gas is coming out of the system, slow down. So green being you're doing good. Yellow means too much gas is coming out, slow down. Red means stop now, stop. You got way too much gas coming out, slow down. So that's one of the nice things with dive computers is it's able to monitor the amount of gas coming in and going out of the tissue and keep you safe. It'll also take track of times that you're not at the maximum depth and give you longer dive times as well. So it helps you be more efficient as you go through this process. Does that make sense? Yes? No?
Can I ask a question?
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
About using your dive computer for nitrox and regular air?
Absolutely. In my personal computer,
Yeah.
this is the one I use for teaching class. I've actually got it set up for, let's see, well, let's just look. Gas switch. So there's all the gases I have set up to use. There we go. I have a 21%, a 51%, a 32%, a 50, and 100 all set up in my system to use. This weekend I was using obviously 21 and 52%. but I can use up to 5 gases on this computer at any given time. So you can program those in, and if you happen to be running multiple tanks, you can switch them during the dive. If you're not, you can at the surface, you can choose which gas you want to use, and you can program in that gas to whatever you want.
So with that computer, does in the book it was saying that you have to make sure everything is basically nitrox rated or whatever, oxygen clean and purged and everything. How does that affect it when you're switching back and forth between tanks?
What needs to be cleaned and ready to go is your regulators need to be oxygen rated for the nitrox blend that you're going to use. And the good thing is that's a great question. We use the rule of 40. Now, you may have read that in the book, but rule of 40 basically means that it's a low enough percentage of nitrox that additional procedures and cleaning do not need to be applied to that. So everything 40% and less, and that's why you guys are getting certified to 40%, is your regulators will generally be 40% rated or below. Your tanks, when they're clean, they'll be clean to 40%. Okay, so your first stage, second stage, and your tank are the things to be aware of. Your nitrogen, the pod that goes in, it doesn't matter. It's designed to work with up to 100% on the pod that goes into your first stage. So the only things that you really need to be worried about is my regulator, first and second stage, rated for 40% or less. Step one. The tank that I'm using hasn't been O2 cleaned for nitrox. And when was the last time it was serviced? It'll have a big sticker on the side of it that says O2 clean, and we'll go through that in just a little bit. So those are the things you need to worry about. But with the computer, the computer is actually not touching anything. It's wirelessly reading to my tank. And that's how it knows how much pressure is in my tank. And it has its own sensors within it as well. So does that answer your question, Ronnie? I kind of went around the bush on that one.
Yeah, a little bit. So do you have multiple sensors for multiple tanks, or you just switch the sensor from tank to tank?
Nope, I have multiple pods as well. Oh, I didn't. I just noticed that I had some chats. We'll go through SMB in just a little bit. SMB is definitely a key piece. It hasn't really got much to do with this class, but we can certainly go through that as well. So let's kind of jump back into this a little bit. So one of the things that you guys want to be aware of is how long can I stay at any given point? Here's how we know that. Now, the good news is it's a pretty long time. If I'm doing a long dive and I'm using one, and I stayed at that dive for 100 at 1.4, I've got a single dive limit of 150 minutes if I do the whole dive at 1.4 partial pressure. I've got a daily limit of 180 minutes. That's a long time. That's 2 hours and 30 minutes, right? So 2.5 hours in one dive at 1.4. That's a long dive by itself. And most dives you'll find you won't be at that total time. So as you start planning out your dive time, you want to take a look at it and say, okay, how long am I going to be down? Okay, I'm going to be down to whatever for this long. So if I'm going to go to, we'll just do some math on this. If I'm going to 99 feet, that's 4 atmospheres. So if I'm at 4 atmospheres on 32% nitrox, 0.32 times 4, that's 1.28. So 1.3. So if I'm staying my entire time at 1.3, I can do a dive for 180 minutes in one dive. I've got a 24-hour limit of 210 minutes. That's a long dive time. But this is how you figure it out. This chart is in your book or in your on your app. You can go to it. And as you start planning your dives, you can take a look at this and say, hey, I'm doing a deeper dive. Maybe I'm doing 40% and I'm going to 82 feet. So 82 feet divided by 33 equals 82 divided by 33 is plus 1 is 3.48 atmospheres. So that's going to 1.4. So 82 feet at 1.4 on 40% nitrox means I can stay for 150 minutes in one dive. How many of you do you think you're going to be able to do an hour or 2 hour and 30-minute dive on the one tank that you have? Probably not. So the good news is here, Here's how you know how much time you can use with oxygen before it becomes a problem. The good news is as you can see very quickly, the amount of time that you can spend is well beyond what you'll be able to actually spend. But be aware, there are limits to the amount of partial pressure of oxygen that you can breathe at depth. It just takes a long time for you to get there. So let's take a look at that for a minute. So if I'm doing 1.4, that's at 82 feet, I'm breathing 40% nitrox. Let's go over to the dive table. At 80, we'll just say 80 feet, I've got a maximum dive time that I can dive of at 36%. Sorry about that. Let's see, 81 feet of 50 minutes. At 36%. That's the maximum amount of time at 36% that I can breathe. So as you can see, you will run out of NDL well before you'll run out of actual oxygen time. It's important just to note this, and it's not super important to memorize this or be a part of that, but to understand there are limits. At this stage of the game, you guys will not hit them, but as you start to do those bigger, longer dives, for example, this weekend, I did a 2-hour dive, right? I'm absolutely starting to hit that level and that point where oxygen toxicity becomes a very serious issue that I need to be aware of. Does that make sense? So I just want to expose you to it and have you have the understanding that it's definitely something to be aware of. Good news is we only have about 6 slides left. We're almost there. So we've gone through a lot. Diving after and flying. How long do I need to wait after a dive before I can get on an airplane?
24 hours.
24 hours is exactly right. Now, here's my suggestion to you, and this is the suggestion from Dan as well. If I'm doing a lot of big dives over the course of the day, and I go through, like, for example, yesterday I did a 2-hour dive, a very big dive. Would it be to my advantage to extend the time before I get on an airplane a little bit? Yes.
Yes.
Now, with technical diving, the recommendation is after any big technical dive, especially ones that involve additional exotic gases like trimix, which is helium as well, that I wait 36 hours. So if you're doing a big dive day, your last day in Miami, you're excited. You go out and do 4 big dives on the Lady Luck all day long. And your last dive is at 5 o'clock. It's probably not to your advantage to jump on a plane at 5 o'clock the next day and fly back to Idaho. Give yourself some time. And the biggest thing I can tell you, the oceans cover 80% of the Earth's surface, right? They've been there for a few days. They're going to be there for a few days longer. We're on planet water. So trying to do too many dives in too short amount of time is just not to your advantage. I get it. But the good news is the oceans will be there tomorrow and possibly the next day as well. So give yourself time, be safe. And I hope you guys have felt that message throughout this entire presentation was be safe, add safety margin, be safe, treat yourself well. And James, buy your wife something nice. Laura, I'll take that $5 later. So as we kind of go through this, be safe, take your time, don't be afraid. Now, the magic question, if I were you guys, I would be asking myself, how do I analyze a tank of nitrox? Laura, thanks for asking that. That was a good question, by the way. I'd give you a good applause on that. It's a pretty simple process. The first process, most analyzers work about the same. The first thing we want to do is when we open it up, we want to calibrate that. So we turn the nitrox analyzer on and we calibrate it. What are we going to calibrate it to? Ronnie, what do you think you're going to calibrate that sensor to?
So you'd want to calibrate it to a gas that you know, so either like 100% oxygen, or you'd want to calibrate it to regular air.
Yeah, to a known gas. The easiest one is as soon as I turn it on, I should be able to calibrate it to 21%. As I pull out my nitrox sensor, that's what I do. Is I turn it on, I calibrate it to 21%. If it's acting a little weird, I'll take it over to a known tank that I know is just air, and I will calibrate it on that known tank to make sure it reads correctly. Once I've got that calibrated correctly, calibration is huge. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take it over and I'm going to put it over the end of the valve, right? So this is, I unfortunately have done what my wife hates the most. I've set my nitrox analyzer down somewhere and I don't know where I set it. thought it was, oh, happy day. As I'm just breaking things in my office here. I happen to find it. So this is a nitrox analyzer. This is exactly what it looks like. So the first thing we do is we turn it on. And you can see now it says 14.5%. I can keep calibrating, and I'm just turning the end, turning the end, turning the end. Bring it down a little bit. And you can see it's a little sensitive. There we go, 20.9. So there we go. So now it's calibrated at 20.9. That's what we're actually breathing. If you notice, there's an end to the thing, end of my analyzer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it over the end of my tank, and I'm going to crack the tank gently and slightly. I don't want that real hard. I want it very soft, just enough to let it air out. I'm going to put it over the end of my tank. What'll end up happening is this will start changing. Hey, Nick. Nick has gone to bed, or I would have her get me an actual tank. I'm going to put this over, and what you'll see is this number will begin to change. You want to let it remain over the end of the tank with that tank until this number stops moving. It'll move very quickly at first. The number will slow down, and then eventually, once it is completely to where it thinks it needs to be, the number will finally end. So, and then just a pro tip for you, if you turn your analyzer off, it makes the battery last a lot longer. Common sense there, but that's basically how you analyze a tank. Then once you analyze your tank, you're going to need to make sure that you fill out a tag. So your tag is going to say 32%, your mod on there, at what partial pressure. Now you can put 1.1 or you can put 1.2. I use the standard in the industry is 1.4. What day you analyzed it on and who analyzed it. Now, in the visual here, they suggest you using a tag. Here's my problem with doing a tag like this. Anybody ever been on a dive boat or on a boat? Anything on a boat not get wet? This tag is not going to be there on the end of a boat. So a little bit of duct tape and a permanent marker goes a long way. Where you're going to mark that is going to be right around the neck. You're going to put that all. Now, here's my pro tip for you for the day. Take another piece of duct tape and put it at the bottom, and in very large letters, put your mod in feet. In this particular case, your mod is 109 feet, 109 FT, in nice big bold letters right here on both sides, front and back. Why do you think that might be important to really well mark my tank, Justin?
Because you're going to be on boats with other people?
Absolutely. So if I'm diving along and that's nice and big where I can see it, and you and I are diving along, and you see on the back of my tank it says 109 FT mod, and you see me starting to blow past that 109, would that be a problem?
Yeah.
Yeah, but the only way you'd know it was a problem is if you saw that big piece of tape on the back of my tank that said 109, and as I'm heading down past that, you can go over and tap me on the, hey, no, we need to go up. You're hitting mod, right? So you're able to go back into that team diving environment. We always work as a team. I always love that scene. Anybody ever seen that movie, The Guardian, with the big muscle guy, and he comes out and says, well, I didn't know we were working as a team. And Kevin Costner says, we're never not working as a team, right? That's how diving is. We're always working as a team. Always, 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 always. So just be aware, take your time, mark your tank well, and watch your buddy. If they do something stupid, I promise you, it's better to have them get mad at you and keep them from doing something stupid than to let them be stupid and have to call Justin and his fire crew out to pull that 400-pound person out of the powder room, right? I'm just going to beat the hell out of that one, Justin.
Do you ever check your just regular air bottles as well, just to see if they're right, or do you worry about that?
I don't, as a matter of fact. If the tank is not marked as a nitrox, then the chances of them filling it without nitrox are pretty thin as well. If the tank is marked nitrox, it means it's been O2 serviced and cleaned, and that the only thing that should be in it is nitrox. So if the tank is marked nitrox, I always check it. If the tank is not marked nitrox, I don't worry about it too much.
Okay.
So now there are certainly exceptions to that rule, but that's a whole different thing, especially when it comes to my own tanks, and I fill my own tanks. So I know what's in my tanks at any given time. This weekend I went through 2, 4, 6, 8. I went through 8 tanks. Yeah, 8 tanks this weekend. So anyway, so I know what's in my tanks because I filled them personally. So I know exactly what I'm dealing with. Actually, I take that back. I went through 10 tanks. I went through two deco tanks as well. So, and funny enough, that was only 4 dives. So I know what's in them. But if you see this big nitrox sticker, before you breathe on this, you should, read warning label, analyze before using. They have these on there. They also have some fun stickers on there. Do not breathe this gas unless you're prepared to meet the Dark Lord. All kinds of fun. If you see a yellow and green sticker on a tank, definitely check it. Make sure everything's good to go. Now, be aware that as you increase the level of oxygen in a tank, you're also increasing the oxidization that can happen. And the reason we want to make sure we're using gear that's rated for this, that has Viton rings on the tank, that our regulator is designed for that as well, is higher percentage of oxygen will actually cause oxidization and excessive wear, and it'll actually eat away O-rings. It'll actually eat away pieces of your regulator if it's not designed for that blend of gas. So we want to make sure that everything we go through that is clean and ready to go. Now, we've talked a lot about O2 cleaning a tank, but what does that look like? Anybody know what it looks like when we O2 clean a tank? It's a pretty straightforward process. It's really not all that complicated. The first thing we do is we take the valve off. We make sure that there's nothing in it. We do a visual inspection to make sure there's no debris, nothing that we should be aware of. The next thing we do is we literally put a special type of ball bearings in them, and we roll it to make sure it's clear and clean of aberrations. Once we do that, we go ahead and put a light mix of basically simple green in it. It's to clean it out, and we put that in, and we roll it with that in it to clean it out, and then we clean it back out with clean water, purified water, and then we make sure it's completely dry, and we roll it again with the bearings to make sure everything's clean. So we clean out all the aberrations and everything in it that would not be suitable for oxygen. Once we've done that, the next thing we do is we get a special neck ring that is O2 certified. And it's made out of Viton. We put that on so that will not erode or become weak. The problem is if you're using a non-Viton ring around the neck, that can actually blow a neck ring. And I've had that happen on a dive. Actually, I've had it happen twice now, where I've blown a neck ring. Now, please realize that this is extremely rare, and you could survey 500 divers, and maybe one of them has ever had this happen in their life, right? I've had it happen twice, so I'm pretty good. It should never happen to me again. But that ring blows. It makes a lot of noise, and you better get yourself to the surface, because when the neck ring goes, it takes about 60 seconds to empty a tank, and it can happen. And this is usually when somebody has properly installed the neck ring. Mine happened on a brand new tank that I hadn't used before on a first dive, so that's when that happened. But if you're using nitrox in a tank that's not designed for it, it doesn't have the correct stuff in it, it can eat away that ring as well. The other piece is in the valve itself. You'll see a small O-ring. They go out pretty regularly, but you want to make sure that you're replacing it with a Viton O-ring, because the last thing you want to do is have that O-ring blow while you're on a dive. So we want to make sure we're using the correct pieces, right? Right tool, right job. Make sense? So that's basically what it looks like. We also want to be aware that increased percentage of partial pressure of oxygen and more oxygen definitely increase the flammability of it as well. Fire loves oxygen, right? Right, Justin? So we want to make sure we're aware of being careful with that as well. And going through and make sure we're doing a good visual inspection, that we're keeping our gear up to date and well as well. Now, one of the things that if you guys ever do get to the point where you're using nitrox a lot and you decide to use a dry suit, we don't use nitrox with a dry suit, because what it'll do is it'll literally wear away and eat away the inside of your dry suit. The other problem with it as well is using nitrox in a dry suit. Oxygen actually contains moisture. Nitrogen does not. It'll actually make you colder. So it will not create a warming layer for you. But if you're using nitrox and you're diving a BC, make sure yearly that you're taking that BC in and having that inspected. Make sure the seals on your inflators are good to go. Make sure your dump valves and seals are good. So have that service and checked on a regular basis, especially if you're diving nitrox a lot, because it can cause wear on those seals. I had that happen this weekend. I had a diver. We were right about the 55, 60-minute mark on our dive. We had 30 minutes of deco ahead of us. We were at a pretty dangerous spot, and he had a seal on his dump valve seized shut. And so it was definitely a problem. And he started an uncontrolled ascent. I was able to grab him, get the seal, break the seal, and get all the air out of his BC and get him back down. So it was no big deal. We were able to solve the problem, fix the problem while we're underwater, and continue our dive for the next 45 minutes. So it worked out well. But as we got to the service, I talked to him. I says, "When's the last time you had your BC serviced?" And he says, "Well, I've never had it serviced." And as we started looking through that and digging through the pieces, I did a light service on the surface, and it was like, well, here's the problem here, here's the problem here, and we found pieces of his BC that had not been serviced, and that were starting to show signs and problems of wear. And we found the problem as well. So have your equipment serviced on a regular basis. Once a year, just bring it to the dive shop and have us check it out and take a look. We'll pull the caps, we'll pull the valves, we'll pull everything. We'll take a look at it and make sure everything's good to go. So just be aware that running nitrox can cause that problem. Now, guys, we covered a lot. If you would like the math sent over to you, just send me a text that you say, "I would like the math sent over to me," so I've got that on hand. If not, it's fine. You can absolutely positively use your My SSI app and pull the charts from that. You're welcome to do that as well. I'm not a very trusting person when it comes to charts, so I do my own math. So that's just me. But I also do a lot more complicated stuff. So, and I like to make things harder. That's me. But I see Laura would like the math sent over to you. I'm happy to send that to you. We've covered nitrogen narcosis. We've covered CNS toxicity. We covered pulmonary oxygen toxicity. We covered nitrogen narcosis, probably a little bit too much, to be honest with you. We covered maximum operating depth and a little bit of deco theory. What questions do you guys have? Ronnie, what's one thing you learned tonight?
I learned a lot about the things kind of to look for when you're using nitrox, especially with like seals and stuff like that, and problems that could happen. And that whole process of cleaning out the tank, I was curious in how that actually looked and worked. Going on the oxygen cleaned and everything.
Was it helpful?
I think so.
Good. I hate this stupid thing. Sometimes I get there it goes. There we go. Good. Justin, what's one thing you learned tonight?
I didn't know that the nitrox could affect your BC and that kind of stuff. I didn't know that it would have an effect on that, so that's good to know.
Good. Was it helpful?
Yeah.
There we go. So we can get there we go. All right, Laura, what's something you learned tonight?
The partial pressure differences.
Pretty interesting, isn't it? Was that interesting to you?
Yes, it was. Sorry.
Okay, good. James, we haven't met yet other than through this class and the kind of floating head. What did you learn tonight? Anything good?
Yeah, the math was interesting to me. I didn't know. Well, I didn't know what I was getting into when I got on the call. So I learned a lot, actually.
Excellent. Tasha, because I'll be meaner to Jason. What did you learn tonight?
I definitely loved how you simplified the math, because that was definitely the most confusing part of the whole stuff. So
when it comes down to it, I'm just an old dumb grunt. I have to do everything simple. All right, Jason. Well, I take that back. Tasha, was it helpful?
it was, yes.
Good. Well, so there we go. Get the exploding. Jason, you get to end the class. What did you learn today?
Writing your EAN and your percentage on your duct tape and date and MOD and name.
Excellent. Was it helpful?
Yes.
Okay, I'll give you the, there we go. Everybody got a thumbs up. Cool. Guys, here's the cool thing. You guys all now have my cell phone number. You have my email address, and you have everything but where I live. And I'm happy I give that to you as well. You can come knock on my door. Just don't do it after 9 o'clock because my wife and I are lazy, or not lazy, but we go to bed early because we get up early. And I'll happily talk to you about this until the cows come home or go away one. So if you have more questions, by all means, please reach out. Here's also my guarantee and promise to you guys as well is any class that you take from me, if you'd like to take that class again, next time I teach it, you're more than welcome to be part of that class again. That includes open water and nitrox at this point for you guys. So if you've been a part of this class or any part of the class that I teach and you feel the need or desire or want to be a part of that class again, please come be a part of that class again. Just the only thing I ask is give me a heads up to make sure I have room, because on occasion, as you guys will find out on Tuesday, room sometimes can be a challenge. Also, tomorrow morning, I will post this up to Teach Me to Dive on YouTube. You can go back and watch this class in its entirety, as well as previous classes, and pick up additional information, because I find that some classes go one way, some classes go another way. Some classes are more complex, some classes are a little more simple. So there's a possibility that you can learn it differently. Now, James and Laura, in your guys' case, I know Jackson is a very enthusiastic young man, but like most young men of his age, has the attention span of a goldfish and a gnat combined. I get that. I've had kids at that age. I have grandkids as well. So I do have nitrox on there, and I sent it to Laura in a simplified fashion that was designed for a pair of 11-year-olds. In fact, that's actually where I came up
Jackson
with.
and I actually watched that today already.
Did you?
Yeah.
What did he think?
He thought it was good, but he thought it was almost too simplified. It was funny. But I think that might have been just trying to impress me. I'm not sure.
But he's a smart kid too. So I've noticed that Jackson's, there's a lot going on behind in that little head of his, that's for sure. So, but yeah, that's the reason I came up with the sponge idea, was for my class. So if he has more questions and you want to put him into a harder class, I'm welcome to do that. But I would just like to take 15 minutes and confirm information with him before I sign him off, if you don't mind.
Definitely. No, I appreciate that. I think that's a great idea.
Perfect. Well, guys, if that's all the questions, I'm going to end the recording at this point. Any more questions, concerns, comments?